Hi, and welcome to this super interesting panel about how education and technology scales in India. We have a panel full of leaders in the EdTech space, but as we speak, I'm also cognizant of the fact that we're in the middle of the worst pandemic that any of us have experienced and lived through, and that has an enormous impact on how education and technology has progressed in India over the last 6 months. In a sense, the whole sector looks completely different. And I'm excited to talk about what that's done to the scaling challenge in India. So before I introduce our panel, I'd just like to say who I am and why I'm here. My name is Olina Banerji, and I write on the intersection of education, technology, and scale within enterprises in India. I've been doing that for 2 years for an online publication called The Ken. And I know some of you on the panel here, but excited to meet the rest of you as well and hear your thoughts. And starting from maybe Ashish, we can work our way around my computer screen and introduce ourselves in two short, crisp lines, and then we can get into the discussion of scaling EdTech in India.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Olina. So my name is Ashish, Jhalani. I'm the global CMO for a company called Square Panda. We're in the early childhood literacy space, mainly looking at rural and tier 2 down towns in India.
Great. And then can we have Sanjay?
Hi, Olina. Hello, everybody. My name is Sanjay Gupta, and I'm the CEO of a company called English Helper. And we are working in getting technology integrated into government schools around India and beyond as well. Looking forward to this panel.
Great. So moving on from early childhood and reading to our senior grades and test prep. So I'd invite Zishaan and then Aakash to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zishaan Hayath. I am the co-founder and CEO of Topper.com. Topper is an adaptive learning platform for K-12 in India and covers grades from 1st to 12th and covers 17 subjects.
Thanks, Zishaan. Aakash?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aakash Chaudhry. I'm the CEO of Aakash Education. We run one of the largest test prep companies in India. And we are the only largest omni-channel company in India with offline classroom centers, online programs, and a mix of both, which is the hybrid education. Glad to be here. Looking forward to this interesting discussion.
Thanks. And before I invite Mohan to introduce himself, I think Aakash, you hit upon an extremely important segment of the conversation, which is the omni-channel nature of Indian education that's existed up till now. And now we're looking at how it's going to change. So Mohan, our college is going to look very different. And please introduce yourself before you answer that question.
Thank you, Olina. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel at the ASU GSV Summit. And hello, everyone. My name is Mohan Lakhamraju. I'm the founder and CEO of Great Learning. Great Learning is a market leader in India and one of the emerging market leaders globally in the space of online professional learning in higher education. We help working professionals and young graduates develop digital competencies and achieve career growth. So to answer your question about college, would you want, so I'll just say a word and then
we'll get to it. I think we'll get to it. I'll come back to you on that. But and thank you everyone for introducing yourself and keeping it brief. But I think one theme that's emerged over the last couple of months is the fact that COVID has forced us to think differently about the work that we do. It's forced us to take into assumptions that we might have held over a long period of time, but now they don't stand anymore. And it's also opened up new opportunities, especially for EdTech. I mean, the amount, I mean, if there was one indicator of how successful EdTech programs have been, the amount of money that's been raised over the last couple of months actually has been quite spectacular. But of course, with that comes questions of access and scale. So before we get to that, there was just one question, and I thought I'd like to start with Sanjay and Ashish here. Um, what what have been some of the long-standing assumptions that have been altered for you during the last couple of months? You know, there might be things that were set in stone for you as you maybe partnered with institutions or schools or looked at the way that your solution needed to be rolled out. And maybe, you know, some assumptions just don't hold true anymore. So it would be great if Sanjay and then Ashish, we could address this question.
Olina, the first thing that hit us was in March when the schools shut down. And we never assumed that schools would shut down. You know, we've had schools shutting down for elections. We've had schools shutting down for bad weather. We've had schools shutting down for a variety of reasons. But we never envisaged schools shutting down. And when we looked at the horizon somewhere late March, early April, it felt like it would be difficult to envisage schools opening for almost a year, despite all assurances of vaccines and the ability to deal with the crisis. So I think that fundamental premise got really hit. And what it did was that it caused us to, as you said, quickly swivel from being an in-classroom solution to being a solution in and around the classroom. And that's really, in some ways, pushed us to accelerate things that we were thinking we would do later in the course of our journey.
Right. That's a really interesting point, and I want to jump to Ashish on that point, right? Because working with schools or working with institutions maybe limits the number of stakeholders that you thought you had to work with, but essentially going directly to consumers or parents, especially in a country like India, it's a complex calculation, right? There's a very small sliver of people who can actually pay for solutions, or at least that's the way it used to be. Now, of course, since everything is online, there's a larger opportunity. So I actually wanted to ask you, in the recent surge of programs that are directed towards younger children, have you seen any change in propensity of parents to pay? Have you seen, have there been assumptions for you that have been completely sort of turned on their head?
Absolutely. I think one, just echoing what Mohan said, right? Sanjay said, the schools completely shutting down was one big thing. And the propensity definitely changed. I mean, changed not only for the younger children, but they have changed across the whole EdTech space, right? The younger children was more important because most of the times the parents felt that there was a face-to-face interaction needed. The children had less time that they would actually sit down in front of anything, right? They needed somebody there. So that whole assumption went out the door, right? Because now the children are at home and the parents were struggling to figure out solutions that can truly keep the learning going. And that was the challenge for the parents, right? The propensity as well, how do I know what to buy? And the other question was, even if I did get it, do I know that my child's actually learning something, right? And those are the other questions that really came about. So one of the things that happened is parent education really became a very big part of the sales process, right? Because it was important for them to understand that when the child was doing something, what were the expected results from whatever, 15, 20 minutes, whatever they were spending on a digital product online.
And did you have to change sort of the way that you marketed the product? Did you have to change the product itself?
So we've had three models to start with. We had a school model, we had a consumer model, and then we had something called school to home. This was a model that we had started early last year that actually gave a teacher an access to see what the child was doing at home, right? And that model has actually worked very well, right? Because even in this space today, a lot of the schools did want to be part of that journey, that learning journey, but they couldn't see what the child was doing. Now this connection actually gave the teacher an ability to see what the child is doing at home, right? Are they progressing? Are they not? Give guidance to the parent, and even if it's not the teacher, it can be an expert outside that looks at that data and says, okay, yes, your child is progressing or they're not progressing. So from our perspective, we didn't have to take a lot of U-turns or pivots, etc., on the product end.
Right, right. And I think you highlight an interesting point, and just to set context for our larger sort of set of viewers that might be watching globally, typically the idea of paying for EdTech has been a little challenging in India because as the numbers go, maybe the top 100 million students or their parents can afford to actually pay for a solution, but that could be changing because of COVID and with the advent of different types of pricing models. So just picking up from what Ashish said, right? I want to quickly jump to Aakash and Zishaan and talk about this idea of the distinction between good to have and must have. Education is a must have for all kids in India, but online education, that wasn't always the case. So I just want to invite first Zishaan and maybe Aakash to talk about, has this distinction between good to have and must have blurred because of the pandemic?
Absolutely. I don't think we had an option. With the lockdowns, there was really no boundary as such because everything was being delivered online. So I think two things happened. First, we discovered what the depth of this learning market can be. So 1 year ago, our site had about 4 million monthly active users. And at the start of pandemic, it grew to about 8-9 million monthly active users. End of pandemic, we are at 30 million monthly active users. Now, to put it in context, it's about 1/4 the e-commerce industry in India. So to imagine that, how accessible it is being tested today, and it's really deep. So access-wise, must have solutions, super deep availability of market. Now, good to have is determined by paying capacity, and I think we will continue to discover that over the next 3-4 years. But the bare minimum, the market is super deep, and it's the access levels are very, very high right now.
And when you say access levels, just to follow up on that question, are you also talking about not just the fact that a family can have a smartphone, but access in terms of actually basically seeing some sort of response and result from a new student that you've acquired?
Say it again, please.
So my point is that access, of course, is one thing, right? Like everybody can have a family can have a smartphone and be able to access a lesson. But in terms of an EdTech enterprise actually figuring out whether that lesson has been delivered in a way where the learning has been absorbed, are you able to track that as well? Like, is that deep as well?
That's pretty deep as well. Yes, that's pretty deep as well. Traditionally, your paid subscribers tend to spend about 90 to 100 minutes on a daily basis. Your free users spend about 30 minutes on a daily basis in learning. And this was pre-COVID, after school only. That numbers have gone up significantly, right? So the paid subscribers continue to spend similar amounts, maybe 120 minutes, but the free subscribers are spending 60 minutes. Now, 60 minutes of learning each day, averaged out across all your free subscribers, is significant amount of time spent on learning tools. And every single minute is now easy to track and can be turned into data that can be visualized in some form or the other. So yes, for the first time, I think we are able to also measure how learning is happening.
That's actually fascinating, because I think that's been one sort of challenge with online learning, is like, how do you track what people are learning and what the metrics should be in terms of access. So with that, I want to jump to Aakash and understand, since you are you and Sanjay possibly some omni-channel players here, where you work you had worked with offline largely and then transitioned to online, and now you have both channels. Just want to understand, for you, the assumptions might have completely changed in a different way, right? And how have you gotten over this challenge of access or increasing actually the number of students that you can reach out to during this time?
I think it was an interesting journey for us. I still remember 22nd March when the lockdown in India was announced. In fact, from 25th of March, we were going live in our classroom centers, as per schedule, uh, for about 100,000 students who were about to start their first batch. And
Right.
with this now, flat in 5 days, fortunately for us, since we've been investing in EdTech for a long time, we were able to migrate all these kids from an offline to an online platform. And to my surprise, the entire ecosystem, when I say ecosystem, the teachers who were
Mm-hmm.
using a marker and a board, uh, flat 5 days, they were able to transition themselves onto an online teaching platform. Obviously, there was some, learning that came through in the first couple of weeks, but they were
Mm-hmm.
able to accept and adopt it, very few times in your life, you get to experience yourself some paradigm shifts. And this was
Mm-hmm.
one where, it actually broke away people from the traditional, conventional ways of teaching and ways of learning. But, in our case, it was more so because students, when they come to us, first objective for them is to get learning outcomes. And once they get to know that, okay, fine, on this platform, which used to be classroom, is now completely become online, I am
Mm-hmm.
getting to. And then the next step is this learning outcome getting into, some performance or some, actual result or marks or ranks or, selection in entrance exam? Is this happening with this learning that we are getting? So I think that
Mm-hmm.
was a very, very interesting, space for us, where we were able to transition these offline kids to leave offline, come on
Mm-hmm.
board to online pedagogy, where we
Mm-hmm.
actually leverage heavily on our offline way of teaching. And
Mm-hmm.
once we were getting that conviction, we were able to produce outcomes also that they actually came in for. That, I want to get into a college. Can you help me do that? And this online platform, as you know, that the entrance exam also fell through, absolutely in the middle of the crisis, and student
Yeah.
had to learn online and appear in these exams and actually qualify in these exams, purely on the basis of online education. So what it has done for us, students who never believed that online education can be a performance or an outcome-based education, it actually shattered and redefined that outcome, even for us, for students, and for
Mm-hmm.
the parents, not at all ready to come for a test prep on an online platform. Second, it
Right.
has given us access to those markets where we would never go as an offline player, but we were very,
Mm-hmm.
very keen to take an online product. So I think now we are
Mm-hmm.
trying to balance out where we should remain offline and where we can explore and go deeper into those markets purely at the back of online, and then identify markets in the middle which can do a balance of both. So I think it's been an interesting journey, and we've been able to, with our pedagogy, sort of make a mark in terms of the real outcomes that students and parents can expect or achieve through online education.
Right. Right. So very interesting sort of uh, almost sort of half a pivot for you, and some interesting decisions that will come your way as we work our way out of the pandemic. But Mohan, I want to come to you because in my humble opinion and in some of the stories that I've been doing and the people that I've been speaking to, I don't think anything has been as disrupted as higher education in India right now. I mean, schools have had a way to cope with it to some extent. Governments have been supportive of schools, but for higher education, especially for colleges, I think it's been a very, very challenging time. And I know that great learning for its professional courses has grown leaps and bounds during the pandemic. But I also noticed that you're trying to help our campuses who want to, go online. So what's growth been like for you? How do you understand it right now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, just adding to what my fellow panelists mentioned, a big change that has happened is the familiarity that everybody has had to have with online learning, right? And that extends to all stakeholders, whether it is students, let's say, are much more adaptable, and they can get on, they're already digital native today. So so it was relatively easier. The biggest change has been actually in the faculty mindset and in the administrator mindset in higher education, right? So there's a lot of resistance to change. If you think about it, education is one of those last large industries that staunchly refuse to adopt technology, right? Like every industry has gone digital. Education and to some degree healthcare are the ones that have been standing firm, right, not changing. And here they got like this jolt that forced them to change that, right? So many of the faculty, there were some who were early adopters who jumped in and who were already doing it even before the pandemic, but everybody has had to do it, right? Some people still hate it, but everybody has had to do it. Significant change in the administrator mindset as well, because they also woke up to this and had to figure it out, right? And now they are seeing that, hey, it's actually not that bad. It actually can work. It actually can deliver outcomes, right? So all kinds of interesting possibilities, suddenly become open. The other big stakeholder, of course, is the corporates, right? So in many corporates, of course, they were always the progressive ones, that actually looked at talent based on their capabilities and then, evaluated them based on their capabilities. There were others more traditionally and, discounted online learning, discounted online programs, and did not treat them as first class citizens, right? So now that has changed as well, so suddenly everybody treats these, they don't have a choice but to treat this as first class citizens, right? So suddenly everything is painted the same color, so you don't have a choice but to evaluate people based on their competence. So that's the big change that has happened across everybody's mindset. So the result of that is that we now have approaching almost a million people on our platform. Before the pandemic, that was 50,000. So and in our case, we didn't have a whole lot of free stuff earlier, free courses, right? So we didn't really engage just user numbers for the because our programs are fairly intense, long duration programs, right? So now the number has grown substantially for a variety of things. Like you said, we've offered our technology platform to take campuses online, right? So over 100 campuses have actually adopted that already, and they are conducting. So it'll be interesting for you to know that I think we are running about 2,000 concurrent live online classes. That was, we had never done something like that before, and so that's a interesting journey that has been happening for us. So the scale, that is the scale that is happening. Similarly, assessments. So in higher education, assessments are extremely important. So this whole proctored examinations, online examinations, and people getting comfortable with that. So that's the journey we are going through right now, right? So as those things get more and more robust, I think higher education is going to become blended forever. I don't think there's going to be a physical only higher education ever again. In every higher education, there is going to be an online component. And to their credit, the government has recognized this, right? So they themselves have said 40% of all college curriculum can be done online.
Right.
Okay. So that's a game changer.
Right. I know many people who disagree with you, but that's a good sort of like, especially in the situation wherein it's actually impossible now to imagine things going back exactly to the way they were. But I think this question of access is really important in my mind, right? We are talking about getting everybody online to learn, but I think access has been sort of a challenge. It's been a double-edged sword. While it's opened up opportunities for a lot of kids in India to, maybe even attend quality lessons that they weren't able to before. But on the other hand, we're also struggling with getting this access to everyone. And I actually want to invite Sanjay and Ashish to, give their comments here, because you work with institutions, you work in areas where internet access the bandwidth may not be that great. So in that situation, how do you both generate access a meaningful access for kids, as well as think about scale while you're doing that, because it's both an opportunity as well as a crisis to solve. So maybe Sanjay, and then I'd invite Ashish to give his comments on this.
Yeah, I mean, it is a problem. We work with maybe 100 to 150 million students from the absolutely lowest income segments. And these students are in cities and they are in places where it takes a couple of days to get to school. I mean, if you want to supply a computer to that school. So the access has two connotations for us. One is, how do we access these students as a provider? And two is, how do these students access the service? And what we are doing is, at least in the near term, we've stuck to our guns and we are working with governments, because it is impossible to get to parents and to students and to get to solve for problems of money and cash and payment if we go directly. So the partnership is with governments. The issue that is obviously vexatious, which is the big question: how quickly can we close the digital gap? Because there are districts in where there 60-70% of the children have no access either to the internet or to any device. I don't think we have any easy answers, Olina. I think that we have to solve in a manner by following the path of least resistance. We have some states where we're currently in conversation for this in and outside classroom solution that will get to students remotely. They can download apps from Play Store and they can use it on one phone. We're trying to work with microfinance to finance tablets to communities that will use it in library form. I don't think we have real answers. I think it's too early, but I think the answers will have to come really quickly as well.
Right. And Ashish, you also work with institutions and schools. So I just want to understand, has that been useful? Has that been helpful during this time, or has it sort of been an impediment to scale?
So, I mean, at this time, no, it's a big impediment to scale, right? A lot of them were struggling to get these young kids to participate in any kind of an online form, right? A parent, go back to Sanjay's point. I mean, if you talk about those kinds of communities, they first don't have access at home to internet devices, etc. And then when it comes to younger children's education, the feeling generally is it's okay if they skip a little bit, right? And especially at the beginning of all of this, it was like, it's only a month or two, or maybe 3 months, and now 4 months. And even now, if you talk to a lot of parents, they're okay with the younger kids skipping several months of education, right? So it actually has been a big challenge, because not just for us, but the schools we work with also, because they're unable, even with their online programs, is to convince a parent to have a child participate, right? And that's not even in smaller towns. That's even across large metros, right? The parents don't feel that they should put their child in front of the screen for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, right? Even if you go and say, no, you only need screen time for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, so the learning continues, but the challenge is still there. So anyway, kind of long-winded answer to what you asked, but yes, it has been a huge impediment. But going back to Sanjay's point, because the realization is there that this is not maybe the first time, right? I'm sorry, that this may be the first time we're facing this kind of pandemic. This may not be the last time, right?
Sure.
So the whole digitization has to happen, not just in the schools, but across the smaller towns, the districts, etc. that we're in.
Right. And are there specific sort of areas of growth that you see, maybe getting in touch with parents directly, or working with other sorts of institutions, if not schools?
So yes, absolutely, and I think all the different foundations, organizations that have been working such a long time in India to increase literacy, right? And working with them at these kinds of times is important, because now that investment in that device, and it could be in the model of a library that Sanjay's talking about. It could be a single device for the parent. It could be a device for the child. I mean, these children are too young to have their own device, but let's assume even that can be arranged. So working with these organizations, there's a much larger opportunity, and that has opened up much, because now they are looking for online programs they're not only looking at interventions in physical form, right? So
Right.
that whole opportunity is now much bigger.
Right. So I wanna quickly come to Zishaan, right? Because I think Topper, as in the last so many years, has been looking at a direct to consumer sort of a model where you're working with students directly, sort of creating a product for them directly to engage with. But interestingly, you've also started working with schools recently through Topper OS School, and I wanted to understand, how does sort of a consumer app largely move to looking at working with institutions, and then is this an opportunity that you see scaling, even beyond the time that we have to all stay home for the pandemic?
Right. Yeah. So like if you think about schools in India, you have this notorious image of not using technology or resisting technology very hard, right? Like that's the last domain where, and the reason why all after school learning apps have taken the B2C approach is because through schools it was near impossible, and they said, hey, we will take an expensive approach of going directly to the consumer instead of going through the schools. With the pandemic, two things changed completely. One, parents got 100% view into how schools teach. For the first time, parents were completely exposed to what is happening inside a classroom because the parent was just over the shoulder. And two, it created a forced training of over 100 days for every single teacher on digital literacy. No matter what age you are, you're forced to. And this is you can have these training workshops of 1 day, 2 day, 1 week, but this is like 100-day training program where every teacher, irrespective of their age, was trained to use a digital solution. Now, both these changes are pretty much irreversible changes, right? The parent is never going to forget what is being taught in the school, and the teachers are not. So I think that has changed things significantly. Schools are much more receptive to technology. They are not only receptive, they are actually sort of forced into technology. So I think they were receptive, and this was an apt time for a consumer product like ours, or any product, any consumer product, to go approach that. So I call it the Slack moment, where you take a consumer grade experience and then provide it in a B2B or like direct to school environment. So I think this is going to be a pretty significant change even after pandemic ends, and hopefully soon. I think there will be a lot of digital traces, right? At least 20% digital traces left in schools that just can't go away once it's there. So yeah.
Right. It's interesting. So have schools been resistant to the way to the technology, to the platform? Has it been sort of a struggle to get them to adopt and understand a digital framework?
Well, not actually. The kids adopted it much quicker. So
sure.
The kids were very quick to it. The teachers, the younger teachers were pretty fast. Some of the older teachers required help, and actually even help was easy because we had live Google Meets going on throughout the day when teachers can just like jump into a room and seek help. So yeah, I mean, it was some challenge, but I think they were forced into it. So they didn't have an option.
Right. I want to come back to the point of being a consumer-first app, right? Of course, integrations with institutions for you is a recent thing, and there'll still be more experiments there. But I also want to throw the question open to Aakash. We've seen a huge surge in numbers for consumer apps, and it's sort of mind-boggling, the number of kids that have accessed online education solutions. But how do we translate that into scale that's sticky? How do we keep, for especially for Aakash, right, which is traditionally an offline sort of behemoth, and now has a foot in online as well. Two questions. One is that, is there some sort of cannibalization that will happen across mediums? And the second is, how do you keep kids hooked onto an online platform? I mean, how do you make sure that this initial growth spurt is also sticky in a sense?
No, definitely. I feel that there would be some accepted cannibalization that will come through in the offline side of the because of online. But I think this has been sort of the way things have moved, every time there has been a digitalization of any of the product or service, it actually eats into the earlier prior market and the products and services. So, we are not concerned about the cannibalization, but we are, rightly to your other point, you know, you cannibalize, but you should have a stickiness there. If it should not happen that you eat into it and the students, we lose the student from the offline and we don't get them excited on the online also. So I think that is where, the concern is that, earlier because of the offline limitation and viabilities, obviously we were in the limited market, but what online has given us has actually expanded our market. Now our entire effort is, how do we build a pedagogy that can get the student what they are coming in up, what are they signing up for. So as I mentioned earlier that, earlier the programs on the online space were fairly learning oriented. How do we take them to the next level of, outcome orientation? And that is where the offline pedagogy implementation onto the online platform is really helping us. For example, when we moved our kids, we had to really move the entire field for them online, whether it is student assessment, whether it is parent teacher meeting, whether it is one-on-one doubt sessioning, whether it is handwritten work and checking that and giving back to the student. We had to go ahead and implement a well-established, strong platforms like Microsoft Teams across all our 200 plus locations in India. And today, we have 300 million minutes in a month of classes being attended by these locations. So that's a huge amount of engagement that we are able to drive just because of a very, very simple formula that we said that we're not going to teach centrally, we're going to teach decentralized. So every location has been enabled as a mini EdTech company, and they are delivering in the local language, in the local dialect, with the local nuances of this local state board. And then they said, okay, I'm not getting taught, I'm in Chennai and I'm not getting taught by somebody sitting in Delhi who doesn't know what is a Chennai board or a Chennai market or can, conversate with me in Tamil. But I'm getting taught by an institute which is probably 10 kilometers away. And when this situation sort of settles, I'm going to go down to that place and meet my mentor face to face and be far more reassured of my performance than I would have been in probably in a centralized solution. So I think that is what we are doing. We're going forward with a mix of both a centralized and a decentralized way of operating our service model, so that the students who want performance, they can be nurtured at the right time, for these entrance exams. I think that is what is keeping the kids with us, in the best case scenario, because most of the other people, are either purely online or purely offline, and we are trying to tread the path and try to, get them engaged with their local language and advantages.
Like, so as I understand it, you're saying that localizing a lot of those actions or decentralizing a lot of the teaching can lead to some sort of stickiness and repeat sort of users coming back to the platform. I want to take the same question actually to Mohan and talk about how, so maybe in test prep the future is a slightly more hybrid model, right? Or in K-12 the future is a slightly more hybrid model. But let's look at professional and higher education. And one of the models that have been sort of interesting, one you said that it could be hybrid, from here on now. Could there be different types of payment modules? Could we see a serious inclination towards ISAs in India, especially since the job market is, has tanked completely? Do you think we'll see sort of a growth of more bite-sized modules, paying for them, paying later, paying as you get placed, those kind of innovations as we go forward? Because students today are graduating into an extremely difficult job market. So what do you see happen now?
Yeah. So, to answer this question, let's look at what do students pay for? Right. So historically, students paid for a credential, right? A degree, right? So people went to a college and they paid for a degree. right? Then it kind of started changing a little bit, where people started paying more if in addition to a degree, you also got a career outcome, right? So which is why the high quality institutions, their fees increased, right? One, because it actually costs more to deliver quality and to deliver the learning outcomes and to deliver the career outcomes. It definitely costs more. So, but that gave them that pricing power, and students were very happy to pay that because they were getting those outcomes. Okay, so the same thing, if you actually now apply in today's scenario, I think that has not changed. What do students pay for? They pay for quality, they pay for credential, they pay for career outcomes, they pay for personalized attention, right? So these are the things that are what the learners pay for, right? So in a degree program, in a high quality degree program, all of these things are bundled together and offered, right? And that will continue to happen. For us at Great Learning, for example, our benchmark for quality has always been what happens in a campus in a high quality institution, right? We did not say that, oh, we are online, so our benchmark should be different. Our benchmark for outcomes, learning outcomes and career outcomes is exactly the same as what happens in good campuses. And that's how we built our entire learning model, our pedagogies, our evaluations, assessments, what have you, right? So in online degrees, it will be the same thing. People will pay for the same things and the expectations will be the same. That's part one. The second thing that I see also happening is that there'll be, in some sense, an unbundling of higher education, right? So people may actually get the credential from somewhere else, but they may get the quality and career outcome based learning from somewhere else, right? So a little bit of this unbundling of higher education could happen. So where, and that is where I feel that traditional institutions that do not embrace quality, that do not embrace career outcomes and relevance, practical relevance, they will be at a disadvantage, right? Because their students will not have a choice but to seek these aspects somewhere else. And EdTech platforms are the natural place where they're going to seek those from, because that's what we provide. Right. And once we start providing those, some of the value that today and historically has been, going to these traditional institutions is going to migrate towards the EdTech platforms.
Right.
And in that process, some traditional institutions who get their act together will survive and many will perish.
Right. So what does that do to, what does, for offline institutions, like you're saying, who are not focused on quality might perish. What does that do to scaling of these credential giving platforms like yours? What does it do for scale essentially, and getting to a maximum number of higher ed students who want quality education?
Yeah. So I think, historically, again, scale and quality have been have been conflicting. Right. So, all the traditional academic institutions are small in scale, but high in quality. Right. Like IITs, even after all of these years, collectively produce some 10,000 students, I think, in a year or something like that. And when I graduated, it was only about like 2,000 people. Right. And in 25 years, they have gone from 2,000 to maybe 10 or 15,000. Right. So quality has always been the opposite of scale. And I think the opportunity that is there now is, how do we use technology? How do we use automation? How do we use crowdsourcing to lower the marginal cost of excellence, lower the marginal cost of quality, so that it becomes accessible to a lot more people? And that really is the holy grail for us, right? This is what we've been thinking about on a daily basis. How do we bring the marginal cost of quality so that it becomes accessible to more and more people, right? It's a hard problem, and I won't say that we have solved that problem. I don't think anybody has solved that problem, but that's something that we are working towards. Yeah. To mention, to take a point from Aakash, I think, in order to reach more people, we have to bring in, vernacular languages. We have to bring in that personalization, and a lot of that will happen through a combination of technology and crowdsourcing, in my opinion.
Right. So that's the marginal cost of quality. That's actually a really nice way to put it. And I think the flip side of the other side of that coin is actually revenue models, right? And how do we look at revenue models now? And I mean, I don't want you to be constricted by just the thought of the pandemic, but that is sort of front and center for a lot of us. But And I want to ask this question generally to the panel, whoever wants to answer this. How can revenue models change in a way where you can start including even students that are beyond the first 100 million tier one urban students, right? It's a problem that a lot of edtech enterprises have grappled with over the years, but now it's given us now a lot of students have a taste of online education, or rather parents have a taste. So how can we think about revenue models in a new sort of post-COVID scenario? And I invite anybody in the panel to actually take up that question.
Yeah, let me give it a shot.
Sure.
I think that if you think about what the new education policy is promoting, which, by the way, it's hard to argue with its tenets of it's very qualitative, it's about foundational learning, and it focuses a lot on interoperability of curriculum, and it brings a lot of focus on technology and reskilling teachers. The big issue with that policy is going to be execution. A, the money, and B, how will you execute? And the point I'm making is that I believe, and I'm talking with reference to the government and public education system, which is massive in our country, 1.2 million schools, that this reform, supported by any policy, will not happen, whether for lack of money or for the lack of ability or capacity, without private sector participation. And it's almost like the telecom opened the spectrum. And we are battling there, trying to figure out ways to help open the spectrum. Because if we do open the spectrum, I think if we can get the services through the public system, to the schools, to the teachers, to the students, the possible flow through beyond the school to the consumer, which is the student or the parent or even the teacher, to make choices and pay for those choices exists. It's a hard battle to be fought because every other way is going to be very difficult, at least in the medium term.
Right. Paying for choice, I think that's a very interesting, and for the first time, I think in India, people are paying for choice. There is an ability to some extent to pay, and there is an ability to choose from different mediums. I mean, there are 4,000 edtech startups in India. I won't go into the quality of all of them, but sure, we have for the sake of choice, we have a lot of choice. But I want to ask other panelists as well. How do we, when we talk about public-private partnerships, we only talk about, in our head, we talk about governments and NGOs and maybe large donor organizations. But how do we leverage the strength of what we have right now, which is a huge, very talented, both offline and online, education institutional base, right? Whether it's an Aakash or a Topper or an English helper. I mean, there's just a wealth of knowledge out there and a wealth of experience. So, I mean, how do we combine these forces to make revenue models a little bit more palatable to a larger number of people, right? A larger number of users. So again, I throw it over to maybe Zishaan, Aakash, you could share your thoughts here.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think we have to look at it like any other internet sector. Your revenue, all of your revenue, 100% of your revenue is going to come from 5% of the users. So in any freemium subscription model, all your revenue is going to come from 5% of your users. And in this sector, that's a huge blessing in disguise. It's a huge blessing in disguise because 95% of your users will stay on freemium, and that's totally fine, and still use a product that is 80% of your paid version. Right? That's how all freemium products work. Your free product does 80% of what your paid product does and costs you zero. 5% of your users will invariably gravitate towards the paid version, and that probably does 10, 20, 30% more than what the free version does. And that's a huge blessing in disguise for EdTech sector, because I see over the next 10 years, millions of users learning on the free versions and having much better experience than what was available to them previously. So previously what happened was the access curve was a very gradual curve, right? Like, so the maximum, the higher access you had, the best quality you got, and it was a gradual curve. Now that gradual curve has shifted into a step curve. So you either have access or you don't have access. You don't have access is zero, right? If you don't have internet and you don't have a device, you're at zero right now, which is unfortunate, but let's tackle that in a bit. Everybody else who has access has now equal access. So it's not like, oh, if you go to the best coaching class, you have great access. It's pretty much equal now. So that's a great leveler. It's binary, but great leveler.
Right. Akash, you.
Yeah, I was just saying that, just picking from what Zishaan just said, I believe that, in education, the biggest stakeholder is the child. And any business model, if it were to be deduced out, has to keep in mind what the child wants. We are all smart people and we're deciding for these kids. And, I don't even remember the last time I picked up a book for education. So, we are deciding a pedagogy for someone, who's far, far away from us. So I think a good business model typically, historically, has come from, the ardent and real needs from the customer. And I think COVID has given a beautiful opportunity to engage and involve the students so deeply and actually ask them, what do you want? And we can really serve that. That is the power of, EdTech, that, I can really redefine a million courses from the same concept, which can suit the individual need of the million users. So I think that is the way that we need to move forward with, if we really, especially in a country like India, of course, access will be a problem and continue to be a problem for next, probably a decade, given that we are just about 24% internet penetration in this country. So given all of those, those who have access, I think it's a great opportunity to create programs which suits the need. And I think that is what we need to train our kids. Okay, you tell us, who you are, and I'm going to tell you, how together we can create a program for you. And they're going to pay a top dollar for that. Obviously, freemium will be used to bring them on board. And after that, the journey should become adaptive. You tell me who you are, and I know this curriculum. Let's together make a program for you. And once this program is set, it's high powered, it's individualistic, and it comes with lots of experience behind it, and you'll surely pay for it.
Right. So I quickly want to bring in Mohan and Ashish as well. We touched upon a few things here: the growth of the freemium model, the opportunity of access, but also, will people in your segments pay top dollar for that if you create a product that's individualistic, that's also good quality. I want to bring Ashish in, right, because you work with a fairly different sort of age group and as well as target group from say Zishaan or Aakash. So within this group, does it work? Does it work to create the best product and then demand top dollar for it, or will freemium models sort of rule the roost for a while?
No, so I think there are multiple things, right? Like I said, making sure the parent understands the value, right? If the parent is going to pay the money, right? I understand that the stakeholder is the child, but ultimately the parent opens the purse and ends up paying, right? So they have to understand the value of what you're going to give them, right? And especially in our sector, right? It's not the child. So yes, we do have an adaptive system. It has a personalized journey for each child, but until the parent actually gets to experience and see that, they're not willing to pay, and that's where the freemium comes, right? Because with that freemium, they can actually see that, and if they were to compare notes with another child, they'll see that the journey was actually different, right? And then you can demand that kind of top dollar that you're asking for, because they know that my child and another child both may have started at the same time, but they're working and they're seeing different things, they're learning different things, and probably based on their levels, they're either moving faster or so, whatever it is, right? So yes, I mean, they will, but it takes a lot longer in our segment than it would maybe, let's say, in Akash's or Zishaan's segment.
Interesting. And Mohan, you're on the other end of the age spectrum, right? Like there is a lot more self-directed payment for products there. So you did mention that quality is going to be a differentiator, but for the time being, is it a lot of freemium driving your growth?
Yes and no. I think there are different segments. There is a segment that is content and happy with the free offerings that are there, and there's a segment that is ready to pay. So let's look at higher education separately and professional learning separately, right? So in professional learning is a relatively new industry, right? It's a new sector. Because people are now realizing that the world is changing, and if they don't keep up with it, they are basically going to get left behind. That realization is happening. It's only in the last 10 years that this realization is coming. It's accelerated in the last few years, so it's a relatively new area. And there, our point is that you have to ask the question: what is the cost of not upskilling? Right? You may not have a job in 3 years. You may be left out of the workforce in 3 years, right? So as people have that realization, and as they are seeing people next to them learn and then change their careers and then transform their careers, more and more people are doing it, right? So definitely in the white collar segment that we are predominantly focused on, the affordability is there. Okay, so there are we think it's I won't say it's a massive area, but there is at least like 1 million white collar workers that can definitely pay for what we charge, and then there is another 5 million people who can do things at a lower price point, right? So that's kind of how we think about the professional learning, and that's in India, right? And of course we have we are a global player, so there are markets outside as well. Now coming to higher education, in higher education, it is less about upskilling. It's more about actually, doing a degree that is high quality and that is career oriented, right? And our education system is notorious for the fact that it is out of touch with what the industry wants, right? Like you heard this, you've written this. 95% people take your favorite journalist, like they'll say 95% or 90% are unemployable. Right? So anything that bridges that gap, that is what people are willing to pay for, and higher education is something that they're already paying for. Okay, so now, so it's basically a kind of a reallocation of that spend that is going from where they didn't have a choice to now there is going to be a choice, so they can allocate their existing spends to what serves them best. So I think that's what we're going to see in higher education, right? There's already 40 million students in higher education, right? 40 million students in higher education. Yeah.
But the first 100 campuses that you've signed up, are they happily parting with their money, or is it?
Yeah. So let's make a distinction here. The campuses that we are working with, there we are basically giving them a technology platform. Okay, there we are using there, and that's not where we are selling our learning programs, right? There we are basically it started out as a social gesture from our side, to kind of meet the need of the moment. So for the first few months, we actually gave it for free. Okay, to a certain usage, even now people can use it for free. Only when their usage grows beyond a certain point, when they have to pay us, right? And it's priced pretty nominally. So there are many people that are paying for it, but it's not, we have not priced it very, very high, right? Because we want people to adopt technology. We want people to use technology. So that is something that we see it, not as our kind of main, business area, right? So our business will continue to be selling high quality learning experiences, to learners, and the technology product and the technology platform is a happy byproduct of that, which we are able to use to digitize campuses.
Interesting. So we're almost out of time now, but I think as a last question I wanted to throw open to all the panelists was, India just announced a pretty significant education policy this year, and it has a little bit for everybody, starting from junior classes right up to professional education. And I just wanted to go around my computer screen again and ask you if there was one takeaway from that policy that interests you in terms of being able to scale your solution effectively. What would that be, right? What is there? Is there a promise there that you were looking forward to that can help you scale your solution? So again, I'd invite Sanjay to start, and then we can move to Ashish, and then go up the age bracket.
Two associated elements. One is that they're talking about the integration of technology into curriculum, which is what we we do. So that works really nicely for us. And the second is the first really pronounced pronouncement on language learning using technology. So those two are very interesting for us.
Nice. Ashish?
So just adding to Sanjay's, I mean, those two definitely big for us as well. But the other part for us, which is core to who we are, is experiential learning, right? Putting things in context for these kids, especially when you're talking about foundational years, right? And that to us meant that for a company like ours, that's the core of the product. So yeah, I mean that would play a huge role for us.
Great. Zishaan, Aakash?
I think the most exciting part for me is the coding for kids, coding for school age students. That's pretty exciting.
Right.
It turns them into creators, right? So early on, it turns them into builders of things. I think that's pretty exciting for us.
Great.
I think
And coding is, yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say coding is the buzzword right now. So yeah.
No, that's actually right. And coding also helps in the numeral and other kind of abilities that the student should have at that age. I think that's a very important addition. But apart from that, I also feel that the whole concept is moving towards a very, very standardized education format. For example, university admission, was very, very disintegrated and very, very regional. I think they're trying to put it together. The kind of consolidation we saw when they brought all the regional entrance exams into a common exam for JE and medical there, that really helped student not to really get stressed with different multiple education standards of different states, remain focused, and also with the enhancement at the junior level, at the primary level, with the kind of education and the involvement of qualities there. I think it is going to make teaching far more effective and concept oriented, even for the test prep company. Because the biggest challenge we face as a test prep company today is actually something similar to what the IT companies face when they bring in an engineer who's trained for 4 years and they have to retrain them. In fact, when the student comes to the school, we have to retrain them, and spend that hard work to take them through the fundamentals of physics or chemistry or mathematics, and then start our journey of concept building and deepening. So I think that will also enable a very, very leveling ground for competitive aspirants as we go forward. I think it's a very good policy, but we have to see how the execution happens.
Sure. So we should expect to see Aakash in K-12 as well one day.
We already help with meditation.
No, I'm just giving you ideas. One, yeah, you have a lot to be excited. So I think the education policy has a lot for higher education. But what do you think you can take away in terms of what helps an organization like yours scale?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. One I already talked about, which is degrees moving online and having kind of more open access and having let's say lesser regulatory burden that is very heavily there in higher education, right? And let quality actually drive things rather than heavy-handed regulation, right? So I think and the new education policy drives towards that. So in fact, there's a lot of talk about autonomy, right? They want to actually give autonomy to colleges and make them degree granting, right? So they want to decentralize. They want to reduce the number of regulators into just one and have separate accreditation bodies. So this has happened in other countries, by the way. This is like we are not the first ones to come up with this. This has happened in other countries, decades back, and they've all benefited from that, right? So there's no kind of surprise. You do this, it will work because there are so many examples of where it has already worked. In fact, we are very late to the game, right? So I think that autonomy is a good thing. My panelists mentioned use of technology is an obvious good thing, right? And moving things online, which basically means that regardless of where people are, they actually now will have access to quality education. Right? What I'm doing is that the access problem gets solved by Geo and Google and all those guys, right? Like they have billions of dollars, they'll use that to solve it. They'll solve it to sell content and games, right? So we just want to piggyback on that and basically go then offer education.
Right, right. Well, for that, I mean, I hopefully all the wars, intertech wars stop and, they focus on all the right things. But thank you so much, everybody, for spending this hour talking to me about India's future in edtech. I think it's a challenging time, but it's also a really exciting time for all of us. And in terms of scale, I only hope, like all of you, that access gets more and more easy, models become more and more palatable, and a maximum number of students are able to access quality education. But thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you all soon in person once once the pandemic is over. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Olina.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
All the best.